What's going on, guys? Bel Air here. We are back at it. Took a little bit of a reprieve to just, get to enjoy Worlds from a distance. I was out of town, but I was spending my nights watching some highlights. Some 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Headphones in, catching up, and I ended up on Sunday. I actually didn't check like Twitter or anything all day or Wikipedia or anything. And once I got home, I actually rewatched the whole day live. So that was pretty cool. And what an event it was, huh? I wanted to kind of get back, and I got a lot of what I hope is, I guess you guys are ultimately the judges of it, but cool content to come soon. But, to kind of break the seal, and it's always tough to get that first video out after you've been away for a while. I just wanted to give some kind of high level takeaways. And in the background, we're going to watch games 5, 6, and 7 from BDS and Falcons. I thought it was an excellent series, as were so many of our final day matches. What did we have? 4 or 5 game 7s, which is pretty awesome. So this is really high level, all of the thoughts for today. The first thing that I really walked away from the week with was just the importance of pressure as I guess is like a concept. Teams that had a lot of pressure coming into this event, Gen G, Vitality, Falcons, G2, those kind of teams seem to really crack in big moments under the pressure. And in this game here, we already saw we're on Kalir's POV, who is excellent, by the way, in this tournament. But there's going to be a couple of situations where Rawas and Rawas and TRK, excuse me, are really going to kind of seemingly not do what we anticipate Falcons to do with their caliber, which is make some pretty glaring mistakes. Here, this is going to turn into a turnover, and Falcons are just going to back off of this. But especially as we get to the death of this game, there's a play at 0 seconds that you may remember, but, Rocket League kind of blends together. But Gen G are a team who have now, kind of fallen apart into their separate pieces, as we learned recently. There's Kalir's absolutely diming up TRK. Gen G are going to be parting and going their separate ways. It's already rumored that First Killer and LJ are going to be a duo. Thoughts on that and a lot of off-season stuff in another venue. But Jack put out a video on his own YouTube channel kind of breaking down how the tournament went and whatnot. And he talked about how, some big regional losses along the way, big quarterfinal outs in some regionals, and, not ever really being able to break into that top 4. He felt like kind of hurt their, their mentality. And, this was a team who won a major last season with Nolly. You bring in First Killer, of course you assume you're going to be better. And to walk away from this season with not much to show for it isn't a good look. I'm sure Gen G was coming in with a lot of pressure, especially after an EWC that didn't go, they could have placed higher. They did well. They did well for what it's worth. But that's a situation where it just seemed like the pressure got to them. Jack talked about comms breaking down and them not trusting themselves or one another. I feel like those are all outcomes of being in a high pressure situation. The same for Vitality. They did so much winning last season. They haven't been able to reach the same heights so far this year. This is kind of the tournament where you anticipate them winning. The biggest thing that they have coming into this finals is the fact that they won it last year. That's kind of, if you're going to make a case for Vitality, that has to be one of the first couple of sentences. And I felt like they just kind of weren't able to overcome that. Team Falcons, of course, as we'll see at the end of this series, we're not able to get the job done yet again. I do think it's important to point out, much like the Boston Celtics, hey, just because you keep getting to like the finals or finishing very well in a season and you can't win it all, like that's not necessarily a failure. There's a lot of teams who would love to have the season that Falcons had this season. It is unfortunate that they were unable to, overcome that final hurdle, as it were, but that's a team that I would not be shocked if they run it back. There's very few of those, and for good reason. They were excellent throughout this entire RLCS season. And then who's the last one I had on my list? G2. Man, what a weird event. And here's that moment, by the way. Clears, Rawas, and TRK are going to double commit. TRK is going to backflip, miss. Rawas is going to flub across the net, and they are going to let BDS tie this. Let's watch this back from all of their perspectives. This is TRK here. Him and Rawas just do not communicate. They both go for the same ball. Not a good clear anyways. And then TRK just kind of totally butterfingers this one and flips it right into the hands of BDS. Let's look at this for Rawas real quick. Rawas is going to get this boost, which is excellent. Could have hopped out to get in front of that one. Does not. Is going to rotate across and then flies across. Can't get to it. Exotic's going to tie it. Steely stuff from BDS that they're going to show all the way into the grand finals against G2. And just not the same for Falcons. It really comes down to moments like that. The same can be said for G2 almost losing in the semifinals to Carmine Corps. They go up, what? That was 3-0. That was a reverse sweep attempt, right? They make it all the way back to 7. G2 seem as though they have totally lost their muster. Nobody on that team is really stepping up to, you know, pull them up by the bootstraps and get them over the hump and win that final game. Carmine Corps are just totally finding their form and running them over. And then you get into a high-pressure situation of a Game 7, and Atau really gave up a couple of goals that really buried them deep in that series, even though he hit a couple to equalize several points in that game as well. And they wouldn't have even climbed back into that series without his efforts. I'm just saying high-pressure situations are incredibly impactful in our esport. I have a couple more thoughts on that in a second. Here's the tail of the tape from Game 5. Let's hop over to Neo Tokyo. All right, we're going to stick with clears. We might hop around to some POVs a little bit here. But again, I was right about a couple of things and wrong about a lot, as it probably should go in the RLCS. You know, that's the reason why we play. And all of this on paper and past results seems as though it's all very cut and dry. But then we got to get there. But the thing about pressure in esports, when you compare it to some other sports where finesse and control isn't as big of a deal, I think about, like, you know, the NFL. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, there's no finesse, or the MLB. Of course, there are finesse elements to every sport, but at a certain point, it is more, you know, smarts and brute strength as opposed to you know, micro mechanical movements and things like that. A similar attribute to the NBA, in my opinion, as to what we see in the RLCS, where shooting and shooters' touch is so important, especially in big moments. Think about like a big free throw at the end of a game, right? That's all finesse and control and overcoming pressure. And the same goes for an esport like the RLCS, where small micro moves and the way that you know, finesse your way into an air dribble or pirouette into a shot using placement and things of that nature, understanding the moment, are the big deciding factors that separate the very good teams from the excellent teams. And we saw some players and some teams struggle with that over the course of this event. Some teams who had no pressure coming into this event and made the most of that was, of course, Oxygen. They weren't even supposed to be here, which, you know, I get that people are kind of taking that as like a battle cry. They kind of like weren't. And this shot from Monkey Moon, oh my goodness. Unbelievable. I can't even understand how he fits this in. Also, where are Falcons? Nobody's challenging this. Gets it over, and then watch the way he just like pancakes this in. I can't believe that even worked. Let's get back to Kalir's POV. But Oxygen come in with nothing to prove, right? Of course, to themselves and the fans, yada yada. But as far as like, no one's like, hey, you know who's gonna win this event is Oxygen. They kind of get to just come in and, you know, nobody is expecting them to beat Vitality. No one is expecting them to beat Gentlemates. And then after you get those couple of wins, then you get the Falcons, and it's kind of like it becomes real. You know what I mean? Although they put up a heck of a fight in that series as well. But Oxygen are a team who really have no pressure on them, especially early in this tournament, and it showed. They kind of just let it all hang out. The same goes for a team like Pioneers, and you could say the same for SSG as well, where people like myself were really doubting them before the event commenced. Speaking of Oxygen, it leads me to my next kind of big idea or takeaway from this tournament. Pressure is obviously important, but the other thing is that the season matters. And what I mean by that is, like, the way that teams perform throughout the year, it actually does accrue. You would assume, like, hey, once we get to the big stage, like, nothing else matters. It's just how you perform. Definitely. But I also do think that we can glean something from how teams are going to perform based on when they are kind of peaking and taking off and finding form throughout the season. For example, if we look at the Major 1 top 4, Gentlemates, G2, Carmine Core, Vitality. Kind of seems like we have, found the teams who are going to be hanging around. But then we get to Major 2, we get G2, Falcons, Furia, and Mates. Mates made both, which is very impressive. Same for G2, of course. And then EWC, BDS win that. They win all 3 of the regionals in Major 2 qualifiers. So although they don't make Major 1 or Major 2 top 4s, they are kind of finding their form as the season starts to go along. And when you combine that with the fact that there was not as much pressure on them as a team as opposed to G2 Falcons, even Carmine Core, I feel like there was kind of some like, hey, you guys kind of need to turn this around and make this season worth it. BDS were comfortably, 3-7 on most people's big boards heading into this thing. Not only was there not as much pressure there as my eyes are bleeding on the skull. Pancake 50, no momentum. Drolly somehow rolls ahead of this play. Look at this. How does Drolly even get this through? Oh, I skipped him. Oh my goodness. Bel Air, what are you doing? You goofed it. All right, here we go. Takes 50, somehow rolls through right into TRK. Like, what are we even talking about here? We'll stay on Drolly POV. But then you compare it to a team like G2. Of course, the season matters for them. They make every single grand finals. I don't need to ramble about that. And then, of course, Falcons and Furia, who are 2 teams who also started to find their footing deeper into the season as well. Look, I'm not saying that we should just take the most recent event and kind of roll from there. What I am saying is, like, a team like Gentlemates, just because they win Copenhagen doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be vying for one of the final 4 spots or a grand finals in Worlds. You know what I mean? The same could be said for Gen G last year. Just because they win the first event does not mean all of a sudden that they are now like favorites to win the world championship. I feel like finding your form matters, I guess, maybe is a better way to frame this point. So where do I want to go from here? Let's talk about how being calm, we talked about this kind of with pressure. What about this? Dogs matter. Land dogs matter. And what I mean by that is, well, you might just have to wait as the game is going to end. Kalir's, by the way, hat trick, 3 saves, 4 shots, and assists to his name, doing everything for Falcons to try and, clutch their way back in here. Let's go over to Game 7 and talk about land dogs, because we're going to talk about a couple people on this pitch right here. Game 7, Champions Field, Monkey Moon point of view. It's an iconic matchup. It's like peanut butter and jelly. So we're talking about land dogs, and what I mean by that is players, and I guess in a wider sense, teams who have the ability to not be overcome by the moment and have just a little bit of that like gritty doggedness in them. You know what I mean? I feel like that's important for some of the pros that I like most, and we saw how some players who I might have undervalued, and I think we as the community probably undervalued a little bit heading into this, how, experience and a little bit of age and maturity, but also just some of that like pure competitive spirit can make some stand out above the rest. It's one of the reasons why I commonly put Beast Mode as a top player in the world. I feel like he has it. Of course, there are some key moments where G2 did not look very good this tournament. We'll talk a little bit about that, I am sure. But a player like Archie, who I feel like a lot of my points pre-LAN were kind of outdated. I was talking, about stuff he had done a couple seasons back and some things that had stuck with me. I do feel like those are valuable as you kind of learn about the person outside of the pitch. But man, when they overcame Gentlemates, it was small, but I don't know why it stuck with me. It's just these small competitive things where, like, as soon as they beat them, he takes off his headset calmly and just like gives them a wave. And I feel like from some players, like, some stuff can be kind of forced or corny sometimes, but it seemed genuine. And I was just like, gosh, like, Archie is, when he is committed to the team and not gonna like James Harden, Rajon Rondo, like, give up in a big playoff moment like he had for like Endpoint back in the day. When you get an Archie who is committed to the team, like he seems to be with this Oxygen squad here, it's somebody you definitely want in your foxhole. And I feel like that kind of doggedness, that kind of we're gonna big brother these guys and we're gonna win this series, stuff like that is what allows you to overcome those big series and win those huge matchups. And Archie was huge throughout this entire tournament. I feel like you could say the same for some teams as well. What on earth happened to G2? They almost didn't even make the grand finals. Carmine Corps almost come all the way back on them, and it really seemed like they tightened up pretty intensely. I know, of course, Atomic had the big whiff. It's very easy to look at an entire basketball game and say, oh man, if he just would have made that free throw. Well, there was also 48 minutes of stuff that could have gone another direction. I don't necessarily think it's Atomic's fault, although that one will haunt him like First Killer's poor clear from Winter Major last season. Or maybe that was Spring Major, I can't remember. And there's just some players who have that kind of doggedness in spades, and others who it can ebb and flow, and some who I just don't think have it at all. But this is not the venue for me to kind of poo-poo on some of these world caliber players. Somebody who definitely has it is Monkey Moon, who took on all the boos that he possibly could in this tournament and turned it into a positive. And he just, I know it's been talked about, it's just Monkey Moon is the best at all the simple stuff. Like right there, it's not even like a big, flip or like rotating into the ball. It's just a very simple drive challenge, pinch on the wall right here, kind of staying out front of the box, floating around your teammates, getting a bump, getting the boost. Like, none of this is super crazy. It's just playing solid Rocket League. And consistency is the hardest thing to come by in this game. And Monkey Moon is more commonly than not consistently a top player. It's why he is a two-time world champion. And it's also why he is able to win in hostile environments. Another point, I don't think that crowds are a positive. Like, do you remember when Gentlemates and in the blue, like, remember when the blue wall and the Golden Hornets showed up? What was that, last season's Worlds? It seemed like that kind of hurt the teams. Like, it's like all these people there to support you. There's so much pressure. Like in the NBA, there's so much, or at least there was historically. The data is actually kind of showing that it's diminishing over time. But, home court advantage was huge. It's like, well, home court, like, massive for any team who has it. I feel like it's kind of the opposite in the RLCS. Like, even EWC, when Falcons had everybody for the grand finals, that kind of seemed like they didn't look awesome in that. Even in this tournament here, like, Gentlemates had a bunch of people cheering for them. G2, everybody was cheering for them against Furia, and against And of course against Carmine Core, and then in the grand finals, and it hurt them every single time. The same as 2 seasons back when Monkey Moon beat G2 in the exact same venue, and this from TRK. Oh my goodness. Monkey Moon would not have had the boost to get to that. Who actually is this? Who saves this? Drolly coming in absolutely clutch. There and there to end this entire tournament. Drolly, absolutely incredible. I just wanted to do 3 videos to kind of break the seal, or 3 games rather, to break the seal and get a video out there. I have so many thoughts about all the players, so many fun ideas that I want to bring to you guys in the weeks to come as we move into the off season. But yeah, those are just kind of some things that I took away at a very macro level. Of course, the teams are going to change, and what we look at this season might be totally different next season. But I feel like when you have these big momentous moments, while you might not remember every single series and goal that was scored and what players were good and bad, there are these kind of high level things that you can take away. So if I'm building a team, I want to have at least one dog on it. That's something that I am going to be curious to see what First Killer and LJ do to add as a third. I feel like momentum is super important over the course of a season, and pressure continues to be a pretty insurmountable hurdle for a lot of these teams, especially with so many of our athletes being at such a young age. So that's it for me, guys. What did you think? Was there any big takeaways that stood out to you, rather than just like, G2 choked, or I'm a huge fan of Monkey Moon? Like, were there any things that seemed to be through lines throughout the tournament that stood out to you that you think are kind of elements of Rocket League, RLCS, that you changed your mind on? Would love to have those conversations down below. Guys, feels good to be back in the spotlight. Those are really old Usher and Gucci Mane reference that I'll just leave right there for you. All right, guys, that's it for me. As always, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to watch the video. And until next time, guys, take it easy.